to GCA Unmuted, the podcast where we share the stories and strategies that show how Georgia Cyber Academy makes online learning work. In high school, the stakes are higher, and so are the expectations. But when instruction happens online, it raises an even bigger question. How do we make sure students are truly ready for what comes next? That's what we're diving into today. I'm joined by Nikki Colwell, a high school teacher here at GCA, works every day to prepare students, not just for graduation, but for real life success in college, careers, and beyond. We'll explore what secondary instruction looks like in a virtual setting, how Nikki supports students in building independence and critical thinking, and what it really means to get students ready for the real world, even online. So, Nikki, can you share a story about a high school student whose growth really stood out to you in the virtual setting?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a story I love to tell about a student I actually had the pleasure of teaching last year. This was a student who had been at GCA for several years. She was very hardworking, high achieving student, but she had really struggled with testing, like final exams and milestones tests. And so she took the initiative to reach out to me and say, okay, I want to do better. What can I do? I shared a few strategies with her, but also her question made me really reflect on what I do in my classroom that will equip my students to be ready for those kinds of tests we know they're going to face. And so I changed a few of my practices with assignment types that I gave my students, trying to teach them more test taking strategies as well. And this student earned her very first A on an English midterm and final exam. And
Oh,
she's going to be taking the milestones this year. And I cannot wait to hear about her terrific scores on the milestones this year because I just know she's going to knock it out of the park.
that's awesome. So, integrating the test taking strategies was kind of the growth. So, the big challenge was just test anxiety, you think? Is that kind of what the issue was? Like she understood the material but kind of froze up? Is that kind of what you saw?
I think a little bit of that definitely, but also particularly as an ELA teacher, sometimes students might struggle with comprehending texts that they haven't encountered before. There's a lot of background knowledge that goes into really understanding something that you read. So, one of the things that we did last year was we started incorporating an article of the week every week that would help my students build their background knowledge on just a wider variety of topics. And that also gave them additional practice reading independently and answering the kinds of questions that they were likely to see on tests. So we saw a lot of growth in their ability to think critically on their own about different topics through that process.
Wow, that's so cool. So building the background knowledge, that makes sense in terms of saying, hey, we're going to give you an article of the week. Did you have any pushback from students with this when you started incorporating that for the first time, or were they kind of on board when you were like, hey guys, we're doing this article of the week here, more reading all this stuff? Or like, how did you integrate that into the classroom? Was it like a warm up? Like, how'd you do that?
Yeah, so I chose articles that would tie into our curriculum in some way and found little ways throughout the week to bring that into the discussion. So, for instance, we were reading the Odyssey and they read an article of the week about whether or not the Trojan War actually happened and
Mm,
looking at some historical evidence there. So, as we were reading, and the Trojan War got mentioned, I was like, hey, you might remember in your article of the week, this is something historians think could have really happened, and pulling them in that way to get that buy in. And I think for the most part, they recognized that there was value in learning a little more just real world. We were able to bring in history and cultural connections into the curriculum more that way.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, because that's probably something that students don't enjoy. So like, wow, I'm never going to use this. I'm just using it here in a classroom. So now you make it more real for them. That's awesome. When you look at this student, I forget the one with the testing that you saw made their
Mhm.
first A last year on like a midterm and all this sort of stuff. What what did that student specifically mention to you? Like, this is what really helped me, Miss Colwell. This is what did it. Or did she say it was the articles of the week? Was it something else? Or like, did she share with you personally? Do you recall?
Mostly we just celebrated her win.
Mm.
And I don't know that she would even say it was any just one thing. It was a combined effort of putting more time into reading outside of class. Her participation was incredible. She was so engaged in class. Her dog even became basically our class mascot and would greet the class at the beginning of every day, coming on camera. And all of those things put together make such a difference and help set up a student for success. So I was not surprised when she earned that A, even though she was absolutely blown away to finally get an A on a final exam.
That's so cool. So, what do you think her achievement then, tells us like what's possible for high school students in an online environment? What do you think?
I think it says everything about the way that this environment can set students up for success. I think she had a lot more comfort participating and really getting engaged in our conversations and discussions than she might have had in a more traditional setting. And I find that that's true of a lot of my students. We use the chat feature often in class, and I am consistently amazed at the quality of ideas my students will share through the chat
Mm.
because there's something about being able to type out your thoughts on a piece of literature that might be a little more comfortable than raising your hand and just speaking those ideas aloud. So, having that ability to really participate in a way that is accessible for more students, I've seen bring a lot of success.
Mm. So that's a great segue, mentioning like what sort of strategies specifically you're using in the classroom that are like helping students achieve. So, what do you think are some priorities then? Like, if you had to list, like, you have to hit these, Halton, if you are going to teach high school students virtually. Like, what are the most important priorities you've seen, like you've done yourself, or you've seen other teachers do that, hey, you got to hit these priorities when you're teaching students virtually?
I think first and foremost, we've got to make it fun, right? Because we know that there are so many possible distractions out there for all of us. So, making our lessons as interactive and engaging as possible. In any given day, my students might discuss something in a small group breakout room and come back and share their ideas. They might be participating in a collaborative activity with the class. We play games together most days, which is always something they love. If we don't play a game every day, I'm almost sure to get a request for a game the next day, right?
Mhm.
So using that variety and keeping things as interesting as possible while also always honoring the contributions that everybody brings to our discussions. One of the things I tell my students often, beginning on day one, is that they have stories that are worth sharing and ideas that the world needs to hear. And so I encourage them to use their voices, tell those ideas in whatever way they want, whether that's coming on mic or sharing them in the chat. And I think that fostering of respect and showing the appreciation for all the unique perspectives that students bring in really helps create a community feeling in our classroom where people want to share their ideas.
No, that's so great. So it's like making it fun, making it interesting, but then also honoring contributions. I love that because if you didn't let students know like, oh man, that's such a great answer, or like thanks, or if you're just like shutting them down if they say something bad, it's like obviously no one's going to want to participate. So I love that, those priorities. So you mentioned like making it fun, making it interesting because there's a lot of distractions, right? So how do you, is there something more than just making it fun, just making it interesting that you do that you help students take ownership? Because we're talking about high school students, so these students are a little bit older, right? So it's like, how do you teach these students to take ownership of like their actual learning, especially being online, right? Because they have
Mhm.
access to phone, Netflix, YouTube, whatever, right? So what do you do for your students to help them take ownership of like, hey, like this is, you have to learn this. I can't learn it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we're still in the process of doing right now as we're getting started with the new school year is letting students set their own goals for
Hmm.
the school year and thinking about the steps they are going to take to achieve those goals, right? So I teach freshman students. A lot of them don't know what they might want to do next after high school just yet. So, one of the things I'm always encouraging them is to be aware of that goal for graduation, to be aware of their GPA so that whatever they decide to pursue next, they'll have those doors open. And I'm encouraging them just to learn about all the different types of careers there are out there. Because honestly, that's something I wish I had done a more as a high school student. I didn't know a lot about all the cool different jobs that are available in the world. And so, it took me a minute to find my career path as a teacher and really think about what I wanted my life after high school to look like. So, I want our students to investigate those different options that are available and start learning about where they might want to go next. And I think that when they set their own goals and their own steps toward achieving those goals, that really does help them take some more ownership of their learning. They get to begin with the end in mind and see this assignment not just as a box to check, but a step toward that bigger picture.
Right. No, and that's the perfect segue too, because I was going to ask you like, how do you help these students uh, think about what's after high school? So, for example, you mentioned like your students can, not everybody's going to go to college, or not everybody wants to go to college, or some people want to start in the military, some people want to go straight into the workforce. So, are there any, is there anything specific that you do to support your students in connecting like, you have college, you have the military, you have the workforce, you have other things, you start a business, whatever. Are there things specific to these different goals that you have students already thinking about to support them in, what do you want to do after graduation?
Mhm. Absolutely. So, my class is literature and composition. So, I say what we do in that class is we read and we write. And I'm constantly reminding my students that no matter what's headed for them next, reading and communicating will be part of that path, right? Maybe they're not going to be asked to read a novel in their life after high school. I hope they'll just want to because I want them to find their identity as readers and find what they'll love to read. But if that's not required, they're going to have to read something. They're going to have to communicate in some way. So we talk a lot about how we're building those skills that will set them up for success in whatever might come next in their pathway, while also building the foundation to give the option for college. Because, especially working with freshmen, I like to encourage them to keep that door open, to don't just write off college, right? Learn about careers and things you might want to pursue, but don't sell yourself out of college. Don't think it's not an option, especially with the great opportunities we have in Georgia for things like Hope Scholarship. I like to make sure my students are aware of what those requirements are so that if that's something they want to pursue, they can make sure they're going to be qualified for the Hope Scholarship and have that opportunity. And it was a surprise to me when I started talking about that, how many haven't really given that serious consideration. And when they start thinking about it, they start realizing, okay, if they want to go to college, this could be a viable option for them. And so that's really where I stand, especially with freshmen, is just to not get themselves locked in to one or another, but to consider the different opportunities that are available and be ready and prepared wherever they might decide to go.
Sure. No, those are great. Those are great points. And also there, I can't remember if you mentioned dual enrollment, but being able to do dual enrollment at GCA as well, us being able to do that. I mean, most schools are doing that as well, but that's a great option for students that already know, hey, I want to do college. They can be preparing for post graduation in high school.
Yes, absolutely. And I have a lot of students who go from my class into taking some advanced placement courses as well as another way to start earning those college credits. And I love that we're able to support all of those opportunities here at GCA, so that students who know they want to pursue college can get that head start.
Mm,
That's just amazing when you can knock out a year of college credits for
mm.
free while you're in high school. What a deal.
Yeah, no kidding. So, what do you think other schools, whether virtual or traditional brick and mortar schools, what could they take away from GCA's approach to preparing our students, either teaching our students instruction or the things that you just talked about, like just preparing them for life or just, connecting what happens in the classroom to what's out there in the real world. Like, what do you think other schools could learn from what we're doing at GCA?
I think our flexible approach would be one of the biggest takeaways because obviously a more traditional brick and mortar school is probably not going to be able to do things exactly the way we do. But I think they can incorporate some flexibility, giving some students options, whether it's in the product that they produce for their coursework or even down to the ways that they participate in class. I know reflecting back on my time in a brick and mortar school, I didn't give my students nearly as many options for how to engage and participate in the class. And I think that ultimately that limited the participation I got because not every student is going to be able to or feel comfortable participating if you pigeonhole them into just one way. And I saw that when I moved to this virtual environment and really had no choice but to provide more options, I had so much more participation and engagement from my students. And it was like a light bulb moment. Oh, when we give options, they'll find the way that they're able to engage with the material and the curriculum. And my classroom is so much more complete because of that, because instead of just a few voices being heard, we're getting to hear from every voice and seeing that every voice really matters. So that flexibility is something that I think every school could take away from what we do right.
Hmm. Love that. Yeah. And obviously, you mentioned the chat box feature. They don't have the chat box feature in a traditional brick and mortar, but maybe if they had a sheet of paper out and they were able to write their thoughts down and then share it later. And then also, if you're an online school, making sure that they are using the chat. I know that some teachers are scared of the chat. They might be like, I don't know what my students saying, what you're going to hear, but it sounds like you've had a ton of success with the chat box and getting more participation from your students. So,
Yeah.
but what do you think makes GCA different from other models that you've seen or worked in, Nikki?
Again, it comes to that flexibility that I already hit on, but I have seen this model be a place where really every student can thrive. Not every student is going to do their best learning in a traditional model for a variety of reasons. For some of our students, there are health concerns where being in a room full of other students just might not feel safe, right? Um, for other students, they are battling things like anxiety or working on developing their social skills. And so that constant face to face interaction might not be a place where they can learn and thrive, but the way that they can still interact with their peers virtually without so much social pressure can be really great. Like one of the things we're able to offer our students is the option to turn their cameras on, but in privacy mode, where only their teacher can see them. And that small step makes such a big difference for some of our students in their level of comfort as they're engaging with the class and the material. And so being able to offer that to students is such an advantage. There's no such thing as privacy mode when you're in a traditional brick and mortar school. Um, and so for the students who need some of those extra supports, we've got it. The other thing I see that I am able to do so much better at GCA than I ever was in a traditional classroom is providing extra support and some differentiation, right? So, in a traditional classroom, when I had a student who needed some extra help, the whole class was really aware of that because there was no way to go and work one on one with the student without everybody else seeing it. But here at GCA, I can have a breakout room where I work with one or a small group of students to provide them extra help. And the rest of the class is working on their task and they're not bothered. They're not disrupting the students I'm working with. They don't even realize I'm giving extra help to somebody. I just love that about our model that I really can meet my students where they are and provide them extra support or ways to extend their learning. I'm also constantly working with groups of students and going a little deeper into the discussions and the conversations with them, giving them ways that they get to learn more about a topic. And that is just it just seems to work better in this model than it ever did for me in a traditional school.
Sure. So piggyback off of that, thinking about those things that you're like, man, this is what works in this model. What like systems, routines, teaching strategies, what are the things that GCA is doing that could be a blueprint, like a framework for other virtual schools to follow? Like, what would you say is like, hey, make sure you do these couple things and you're
Hmm.
good? Or you could also include what are some things that even if you're a traditional school, like how does what we're doing at GCA also apply in a traditional brick and mortar school? Because sometimes when we view these and we think about online versus traditional or brick and mortar, it's like, oh well, what works in an online will never work traditional or vice versa. So
Hmm.
help bridge the gap for those things, but also let us know like what are those systems, routines, teaching strategies that you're like, hey, these if you can do these things in this, follow this framework, follow this blueprint, you will find success.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think you just about stole my answer is having a framework, having a blueprint. I have a very consistent framework in my students' Canvas course, which is like their online classroom that they go to. Every day there will be a daily page. That daily page will have my lesson for the day so that they can go back and review all the lesson slides if they need to, and it will also have a daily to do list reminding them if there is something they needed to read that day, if there's an assignment that is due that day. And that is the framework. Literally every day of the semester will have that page. And so as we're getting into the year, I'm training them to look there if they're out, if they need to review, if they've just forgotten what is due. Go to the daily page. It's right there for you. It's going to be the same every single day. And having those consistent routines really does set students up to succeed. A lot of our students who are not achieving at the level we might expect, it's not that they don't want to, it's that maybe they don't know where to get the resources, right? So if we've got it there in a consistent manner, that is everything for these students. They can go and get those resources. And then within my daily lesson, there's even a very predictable manner that it's going to flow. We're going to start with some teaching, and then we're going to practice that teaching together. And then they're going to have that work time built into class where they get to work and apply what they've learned, but I'm there available. I'm watching their screens. I'm checking in on them. And that consistent pattern I have found really sets up the students to succeed. It helps me to be better aware of whether they really have mastered the material. So having that structure and organization is something I think any teacher could take from what works well here. Um, you really have to be very organized to be a successful virtual teacher. And it again, reflecting on my time before GCA, I wish I had had more structure and predictability in place. And I think it would have served my students well.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. Having a plan, having a framework, following that, being organized. So these are going to be fighting words. But what would you say to someone who thinks, you can't prepare high school students for the real world online? You have to do it brick and mortar. What would you say to someone? who thinks that, or someone who's listening right now. You can't do that online. You can't prepare kids online for the real world. You have to do it traditional. What would you say?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'm proof that our real world life can be largely online, right? We've got a huge staff who our jobs are online, and there are more and more jobs coming all the time that will be done primarily online. So this is great preparation for those careers, but I would argue that it's also great preparation for any kind of career and community involvement in real life because we are providing very needed scaffolding to develop these social skills. And a lot of students need that, right? Before you can be comfortable using your voice to speak out at, say, a town hall meeting, you might need to start using your voice typing a chat message in class. And that practice with using your voice, with sharing your ideas, can build the confidence to then speak up at a town hall meeting, at a boardroom meeting, at a pitch for the business you want to start, or a job interview, which is like probably one of the scariest situations most high schoolers can imagine, right? So they are getting that practice for those social skills along with the high quality curriculum in all of the academics here at GCA. So absolutely, I have no doubt that my students are very well prepared for the real world. If they want to pursue a job online, they'll be a step ahead of a lot of their peers with their comfort with technology. But whatever they want to do, they're going to have the skills they need to succeed.
Love it. So I know that you're teaching your students, but what would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned about preparing your students for life after high school, or just being an online teacher in general? What do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned?
Oh, I learn from my students every day. So that is a tough one. I think they have taught me so much about the value of these diverse experiences. One of the things I love about GCA, because I live in a very small town, I describe my hometown as halfway between Atlanta and Macon, which means we're the middle of nowhere. And GCA is such a diverse student population. So we've got students from very small towns like me, we've got students from Atlanta, we've got students whose families are from all across the world, who might speak multiple languages and come from many different cultures. And they bring so much of that to our conversations. So they have really taught me a lot about the value of hearing from different voices and different perspectives and the way we can all grow from learning from one another.
Hmm, love it. Always learning. So here's today's big idea again. With the right guidance, challenge, and support, virtual high school students can have success, can graduate not just with credits, but with confidence in what comes next. So thanks again to Nikki for joining us today. If this episode gave you a new perspective, be sure to subscribe and join us next time on GCA Unmuted, Voices of Virtual Education. Thanks again, Nikki.
Thanks so much for having me.